The Young and the Restless spoilers. A storm is quietly gathering in Las Vegas, where the glittering lights no longer symbolize glamour, but instead conceal a tightening web of danger, and the return of Matt Clark feels less like a coincidence and more like a warning that something irreversible has already been set in motion, because when a man like Matt resurfaces, it is never just a comeback, but the beginning of consequences that ripple outward, pulling everyone into his orbit, whether they are ready or not. And this time, the tension is sharpened by the fact that Nick Newman is no longer simply reacting to a threat, but actively preparing to eliminate it. A shift that transforms him from protector into something far more unsettling. A man willing to consider crossing a moral line he once believed defined him. Matt is no longer operating like a desperate fugitive scrambling to survive, but rather like someone who has studied his enemies and learned from every past failure, and that transformation alone makes him exponentially more dangerous. Because patience, when paired with resentment, becomes a weapon, sharper than any blade, and his desire for revenge is no longer chaotic but calculated, which places the Newman family in a position where every move must be weighed carefully, because one misstep could trigger a chain reaction that no one can contain, and if one were to look at Matt with a degree of fairness, there is an argument to be made that he is not simply a monster, but a man shaped by betrayal and loss, yet that nuance does not soften the reality that he is now. Choosing to weaponize that pain and that choice is what makes him truly terrifying. Nick, meanwhile, is caught in a psychological spiral that is as compelling as it is dangerous, because his determination to protect his family is slowly mutating into something darker, something that no longer distinguishes between defense, destruction. And the idea of eliminating Matt is no longer unthinkable, but increasingly inevitable in his mind. And this is where the story becomes most gripping, because the real conflict is no longer just external, but internal. A battle between the man Nick has always believed himself to be and the man he may have to become. And once that line is crossed, there is no clean way back, only consequences that will linger long after the immediate threat is gone, and it raises a question that lingers beneath every decision he makes: whether saving his family is worth losing himself in the process. Reza Thompson emerges as a volatile catalyst within this already unstable situation, not merely because of her past connection to Matt, but because of her potential to disrupt every fragile balance currently holding the story together, and her growing proximity to Adam Newman adds another layer of complexity that cannot be ignored, because Adam is not a man who exists comfortably within clear moral boundaries. And his connection to Riza feels like something that could either stabilize her or push her further into danger, and if there is even a trace of genuine emotion between them, it becomes the kind of unpredictable element that characters like Matt cannot tolerate, especially if he views it as betrayal, whether real or imagined, and in a world where perception often matters more than truth, that alone could be enough to seal Riza's fate. Sienna Bacal's suspicions introduce a quieter but equally critical tension because she represents the perspective of someone who is beginning to see the cracks in Matt's carefully constructed facade, and her discovery of the mysterious contact labeled R is not just a clue, but a doorway into a deeper understanding of who Matt really is. And the more she uncovers, the more dangerous her position becomes, because knowledge in this kind of environment is never neutral. It is either power or a liability, and often both at the same time. And Sienna's emotional entanglement with Matt only complicates her ability to act decisively, trapping her in a space where instinct and denial are constantly at odds. And that hesitation could cost her everything. Adam stands at the intersection of all these tensions, and his role feels pivotal in a way that is both subtle and explosive, because his instincts rarely align with those of his brother, and where Nick sees a problem to be eliminated, Adam often sees a situation to be manipulated or redirected, and this fundamental difference could drive a wedge between them at the worst possible moment, creating a scenario where they are not just dealing with Matt, but also navigating their own fractured trust. And if Adam chooses to protect Riza, whether out of strategy or genuine feeling, it could ignite a conflict that forces both brothers to confront how far they are willing to go, not just against their enemies, but against each other. What makes this storyline particularly compelling is that it is not built on a simple question of who will win, but rather on what each character is willing to sacrifice to survive, because every decision carries weight and every action has consequences that extend beyond the immediate moment. And if a death occurs, whether it is Matt Riza or someone else entirely, it will not feel like a resolution, but like a fracture that reshapes everything that follows, and from a narrative perspective. There is something deeply effective about pushing characters like Nick to the edge of moral collapse, because it forces the audience to confront uncomfortable truths about justice, revenge, and the cost of protection. And while part of me finds that direction incredibly engaging, there is also a sense of unease. Because once a character crosses that line, the story must deal with the aftermath in a way that feels honest or risk undermining the very tension it worked so hard to build. As everything converges in Las Vegas, the sense of inevitability becomes almost suffocating because it feels as though every path leads to confrontation, every secret is on the verge of exposure, and every relationship is being tested under pressure that few could withstand. And the question is no longer whether something will happen, but when and how devastating it will be. And perhaps the most haunting aspect of all is the realization that even if Matt is stopped, the damage he has already set in motion will continue to unfold, leaving behind a landscape where survival comes at a cost that no one is fully prepared to pay. There are moments in The Young and the Restless when the story stops feeling like a sequence of events and begins to resemble a slow-burning catastrophe, something inevitable, yet impossible to fully grasp, until it finally erupts, and Las Vegas has now become that volatile center, a place where every secret, every betrayal, and every suppressed emotion is converging toward a single devastating outcome, and at the heart of it all stands Riza, caught in a dangerous emotional crossfire that she may not fully understand until it is far too late. Because the closer she drifts toward Adam, the more she unknowingly tightens the noose around her own fate. And the cruel irony of it all is that what might feel like connection or even redemption to her could be perceived by Matt as the ultimate betrayal, something that demands punishment rather than forgiveness. And when a man like Matt feels betrayed, he does not hesitate, he eradicates. Matt Clark is no longer operating from impulse alone, and that is precisely what makes him so terrifying in this phase of the story, because jealousy in its rawest form can be explosive, but jealousy sharpened by paranoia and a deep-seated need for control becomes something far more methodical, almost surgical. And Matt's emotional instability is now fused with a sense of purpose that strips away any hesitation he might once have had. And if he begins to believe that Riza has turned against him, even emotionally, then in his mind she transforms from someone he once desired into a liability that must be eliminated. And that psychological shift is chilling because it reflects a complete dehumanization of the person he once cared about. And in that sense, Riza is not just in danger, she is already living on borrowed time. Riza herself is walking a line that is as fragile as it is deceptive, because while she may sense that Matt is dangerous, she likely underestimates just how far he is willing to go, and her growing closeness to Adam introduces a complexity that she may not be emotionally equipped to navigate, especially given the history that lingers between them, a history that carries both attraction and unresolved tension, and Adam, for all his unpredictability, has always been drawn to situations that exist in moral gray areas, and Riza represents exactly that kind of entanglement, someone who is both victim and potential catalyst, someone who could either be saved or destroyed depending on the person, choices he makes, and it is this ambiguity that makes their connection so compelling, because it is never entirely clear whether Adam is acting out of genuine concern or strategic calculation, and perhaps the most honest answer is that it is both. Nick Newman, watching these developments unfold, finds himself pushed further into a corner where patience begins to feel like weakness, and the looming threat of Matt forces him to confront a question that has been building beneath the surface, whether eliminating Matt is not just an option but a necessity. And this is where the story becomes particularly gripping, because Nick's moral compass is not breaking all at once, but eroding gradually, piece by piece, as each new risk to his family justifies a more extreme response. And while it is easy to frame him as a man protecting those he loves, there is also an undeniable shift in his mindset, a growing acceptance of violence as a solution, and from a narrative perspective. This is both fascinating and unsettling, because it challenges the audience to question whether the line between hero and antagonist is as clear as it once seemed. Sienna Bacall's suspicions continue to deepen, and her role in this unfolding drama cannot be overlooked, because she represents the perspective of someone who is beginning to see the truth before it fully reveals itself and her. Discovery of Matt's hidden connections, particularly the cryptic link to R, serves as a turning point in her understanding of the man she thought she knew, and yet this awareness does not empower her as much as it isolates her, because the more she sees, the less she can trust. And in a world where alliances are constantly shifting, that isolation becomes dangerous, leaving her vulnerable in ways she may not fully recognize until she is already entangled in the consequences. And then there is the looming explosion, a literal and symbolic culmination of everything that has been building beneath the surface whispered about among those who sense that something catastrophic is on the horizon, and the idea that both Ryza and Matt could be caught in that blast, possibly. Presumed Dead adds a layer of tragic inevitability to the storyline, because it suggests that no matter how carefully the characters try to navigate their choices, they are all being pulled toward a moment that will redefine everything. And if that explosion does occur, it will not simply be an act of destruction, but a narrative reset, a violent rupture that forces every character to confront the consequences of their actions in ways they can no longer avoid. What makes this potential outcome so powerful is not just the shock value of death or disappearance, but the emotional aftermath it leaves behind. Because if Ryza is lost, whether truly or only presumed, Adam will be forced to grapple with what she meant to him and whether he could have done more to protect her, while Nick may find himself questioning whether his own choices contributed to the escalation that led to such a tragedy, and even Matt, if he survives, would be irrevocably changed by the experience, his obsession either extinguished or intensified into something even more dangerous. And from my perspective, this is where the story has the opportunity to reach a deeper level of complexity, because the true impact of such an event lies not in the explosion itself, but in the emotional wreckage that follows. There is also something inherently compelling about the idea that the Vegas storyline may not offer a clean resolution, that instead of clear answers, it leaves behind uncertainty, with characters presumed dead, alliances fractured, and truths buried beneath layers of chaos, because that kind of ambiguity mirrors the unpredictability of real human behavior, where actions are rarely driven by a single motive and consequences are rarely contained to a single moment. And while it can be frustrating for those seeking closure, it also creates space for future developments that feel organic rather than forced, allowing the story to evolve in ways that remain grounded in the emotional realities of the characters. As everything moves toward this explosive climax, the tension becomes almost unbearable, not because we know exactly what will happen, but because we sense that whatever does happen will change the landscape of the story in ways that cannot be undone. And perhaps the most haunting aspect of it all is the realization that every character believes they are making the right choice, even as those choices lead them closer to destruction. And in that sense, the true tragedy of this storyline is not the violence or the betrayal, but the inevitability of it. The way each decision, no matter how justified it may seem, contributes to an outcome that no one truly wants, but no one can seem to prevent.